She was an ER doctor escaping the stress of the hospital. He was an elite Navy SEAL who hit his target. When his arrogance peaked, she spoke up. Now, with his rifle in her hands, everything is on the line. The Nevada sun was relentless, baking the desert floor of the high-end private training facility. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, the dry, searing heat was a welcome contrast to the sterile, controlled chaos of the emergency room. Here, 300 miles from the nearest city, the only beeping sounds were the timers on the range, and the only life-or-death decisions involved windage and trigger control. At 30, Eve had found shooting to be the perfect antidote to the high-stakes pressure of her ER career. It was a discipline of quiet precision, a meditation in controlled breathing and absolute focus. Her father, a legendary Delta Force sniper instructor before he passed, had called it surgery at a distance. That's what she was doing now, sending tight, three-shot groups into a target 600 yards away, when the argument erupted from the bay next to her. A team of Navy SEALs had been training all morning. They moved with the quiet, economic purpose of men for whom violence was a profession. But one of them, a younger operator the others called Hotshot Miller, was having a meltdown. His target, set at 800 yards, was pristine. His shots, when they even hit the backstop, were scattered like a bad rash. "I'm telling you, the scope's off." Miller's voice was tight with frustration. "This rifle is garbage." Eve lowered her own rifle and watched, her medical mind instinctively beginning a diagnosis. She'd been observing Miller for the past hour. It wasn't the rifle. It was the shooter. His breathing was erratic, a series of shallow, panicked gasps. His grip was a white-knuckled stranglehold on the weapon. His body position was unstable, his left elbow floating instead of being firmly planted, creating a tremor only visible through a high-powered scope. And his trigger pull, it wasn't a pull. It was a violent jerk, a spasm of anticipation. The team leader, a senior chief with the calm, watchful eyes of a predator, stood behind Miller. His call sign, Eve had overheard, was Grizzly. He said nothing, simply observing, his silence more damning than any reprimand. Eve knew the type. She'd seen them in the ER, young residents, full of confidence and textbook knowledge, who crumbled under real pressure. Miller carried himself with the swagger of someone who believed his own hype, but the target told the real story. He was failing, and he was blaming his tools. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, a low rumble from 1,000 weekend range sessions. "A surgeon never blames the scalpel, Evie. Master yourself first." When Miller finally threw the multi-$1,000 precision rifle down onto the shooting mat in a fit of pique, declaring it completely useless, Eve found herself speaking before she could stop. The words were quiet, but they cut through the desert air with the precision of a laser. "The rifle's fine. You're anticipating the recoil and pulling your shots low and left." The entire SEAL team went silent. 8 elite warriors turned as one to stare at the civilian woman who had just publicly critiqued one of their own. Miller's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Excuse me," he snapped, his voice dripping with condescension. "What would a civilian know about it?" Eve felt a prickle of heat on her neck, but her ER training took over. In a trauma bay, you don't have time for ego, you have time for facts. She met his glare with the same calm, diagnostic gaze she'd give a patient. "I know that your support elbow isn't grounded, which makes your platform unstable. I know you're holding your breath for too long, which increases your heart rate and introduces a vertical tremor. And I can see you jerking the trigger instead of squeezing it, which is why your shots are inconsistent." She paused. It's a classic flinch response. The clinical, dispassionate assessment hung in the air. She hadn't been aggressive, just factual. It was a diagnosis, delivered with the detached authority of a doctor. Miller was speechless, his jaw working but no words coming out. It was the team leader, Grizzly Cole, who finally broke the silence. He stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He wasn't angry. He was intrigued. He looked from Eve to Miller, then down at the rifle on the mat. "You sound pretty sure of yourself, ma'am," he said, his voice a low baritone. "I am," Eve replied simply. Cole's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something, a challenge, a test, igniting in their depths. He picked up the rifle, checked the chamber, and then did something that made every other SEAL on the line take a half step forward. He held the rifle out to her. "All right, doctor," he said, his voice dropping the formal, "ma'am. Let's make this interesting. Hotshot here has been trying to hit that 800-yard target all morning." He gestured with his chin toward the distant steel plate. "You put one round on that target, just one, and I'll personally fund a new set of advanced medical training mannequins for your hospital's ER. I'll write the check myself." A murmur went through the team. This was a significant wager. "But," Cole continued, his voice hardening slightly, "if you miss, you'll be having a very long, very official conversation with the base commander about why a civilian was handling a restricted military weapon system during a live-fire exercise. A conversation that could get this facility's contract with the Navy permanently revoked." The stakes were suddenly immense. This was no longer a simple disagreement. It was a professional challenge with serious consequences. Eve looked at the rifle, then at the faces of the SEALs watching her. They were a jury of the most dangerous men on the planet. Her father's voice again, a whisper of encouragement from the past. "Never make a diagnosis you can't defend, Evie. Now, pick up the scalpel." She nodded once, her expression calm. "I accept." Eve took the rifle from Cole. The weight was familiar, yet foreign. It was heavier than her custom-built rifle, balanced differently, the scope a top-tier piece of military hardware. She ran her hands over the weapon, not with bravado, but with a surgeon's gentle, probing touch, familiarizing herself with its anatomy. The SEALs formed a loose semicircle behind her. Miller stood off to the side, arms crossed, his face a mask of resentful curiosity. Cole stood directly behind her, watching her every move. "Before I shoot," Eve said, her voice steady and clear, "may I show you what he was doing wrong? It's better to demonstrate the diagnosis before proving the cure." Cole's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. He gave a sharp nod. "Go ahead." Eve settled behind the rifle, but didn't aim. "First, the platform," she began, adopting Miller's unstable posture. His support elbow was floating. "It's like trying to perform surgery on a patient who's on a trampoline. All your fine motor control is wasted compensating for the instability." She then shifted her weight, planting her elbow firmly, creating a solid base of bone-on-ground support. "You need a stable skeletal structure. Bone support, not muscle tension." The SEALs exchanged glances. This wasn't just shooting advice, it was biomechanics. "Second, the grip," she continued, her hands wrapped around the rifle. He was choking it. "That tension radiates up the arms, into the shoulders, and disrupts your natural point of aim. The grip should be firm, but relaxed. Like holding a scalpel. You need control, not a death grip." Even Miller was leaning in now, his defensiveness replaced by grudging attention. "And the most critical issue, trigger control." Eve placed her finger on the trigger. He was slapping it. "That's a sympathetic nerve response. The brain knows the explosion is coming and tries to get it over with." She looked back at Cole. "A trigger press should be a deliberate, isolated movement, straight to the rear. You should be surprised when the rifle fires, not because you yanked the trigger, but because you reached the end of a smooth, controlled process." She paused, letting the information sink in. "It's about divorcing the action of firing from the anticipation of the result." Cole nodded slowly. "Textbook explanation, Doctor. Now, let's see the execution." Eve settled into her final shooting position. She made a series of tiny, precise adjustments until the rifle felt like an extension of her own body. She took a deep, cleansing breath, then another. She checked the wind, noting the subtle mirage shimmering over the desert floor. She exhaled halfway and found her natural respiratory pause. The world narrowed to the circle of light in the scope. The crosshairs settled on the distant steel target. Time seemed to slow down. She could feel the weight of 8 pairs of eyes on her, but they didn't matter. There was only the target, the crosshairs, and the steady, increasing pressure of her finger on the trigger. The trigger broke. The crack of the rifle was sharp, clean. The recoil came straight back into her shoulder, perfectly managed. Through the scope, she saw the bullet's vapor trail arc across the desert air. A split second later, a clear, ringing ping echoed back from the target. Dead center. But she wasn't done. Without lifting her head, she worked the bolt with fluid efficiency, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a new round. She settled back into her rhythm, found her breath, and squeezed. Crack. Ping. Again. She worked the bolt, her movements economical and precise. Crack. Ping. 3 shots. 3 hits. She finally lifted her head from the scope and took a slow breath. The range was utterly silent, save for the whisper of the desert wind. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Cole remained motionless, his high-powered binoculars pressed to his eyes, studying the distant target. The other SEALs looked from the target back to Eve, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. Finally, Cole lowered his binoculars. He turned to face her, and for the first time, his professional mask was gone. In its place was a look of pure, unadulterated awe. 3 rounds, he announced to his team, his voice quiet but carrying across the range. 3 rounds inside a 2-inch group. Dead center. He looked back at Eve. Where in the hell did you learn to shoot like that? My father taught me, Eve said, her voice a little shaky now that the adrenaline was fading. Miller, his face pale, stepped forward. That's not possible. No one shoots an unfamiliar rifle like that. That's not just skill, that's instinct. One of the other SEALs, an older man with graying temples, spoke up. What was your father's name, ma'am? William Reed, Eve replied. The older SEAL's eyes widened in recognition. He exchanged a significant look with Cole. William, the surgeon Reed? From the unit? Eve's head snapped up in surprise. You knew him? Knew of him, the SEAL said with a newfound reverence. He was a legend. An instructor at the operator training course before he retired. Wrote half the doctrine on advanced marksmanship we still use today. They called him the surgeon because of his precision. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. The atmosphere shifted instantly from shock to understanding. It all made sense now. This wasn't just some random civilian, this was the daughter of a legend, a woman who had inherited a legacy of impossible skill. As if on cue, a black sedan pulled up to the range office. A man in the crisp uniform of a Navy commander emerged. His authoritative bearing and the way the SEALs straightened up announced his rank. Commander Hayes, Cole said quietly to Eve. He's the regional CO. Here to check on our progress. Commander Hayes approached the group, his sharp eyes taking in the scene, the silent team, the rifle now resting on its bipod, and the civilian woman standing in their midst. Senior Chief Cole, report, he commanded. Training is proceeding, sir, Cole replied smoothly. We've just had some unexpected but valuable instruction from a civilian consultant. He gestured to Eve. This is Dr. Evelyn Reed. Daughter of William Reed. The commander's eyebrows shot up. Reed? The surgeon? He studied Eve with a new intensity. I read his file when I took command. One of the best marksmen this country has ever produced. He walked over to the spotting scope and peered through it for a long moment. When he turned back, his expression was one of deep respect. Dr. Reed, he said, that's not just shooting. That's a masterclass. The praise felt surreal. Eve had always seen her ability as a private connection to her father, a shared discipline, not a public spectacle. The idea that these elite warriors, men at the absolute pinnacle of their profession, viewed her skill as something extraordinary had never occurred to her. Commander Hayes turned to Cole. "Explain what happened here." Cole recounted the entire event succinctly: Miller's struggles, Eve's diagnosis, the challenge, and the flawless demonstration. He didn't embellish, but he didn't downplay the significance of what he'd witnessed. When he finished, Hayes was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on Eve. "Doctor, your shooting is phenomenal. But that's not what impresses me most." He gestured toward Miller. "What you did for him is more valuable. You didn't just hit the target, you diagnosed why he was missing. You taught him. That's a much rarer skill." "Sir," Cole interjected, seizing the opportunity. "With your permission, I'd like to formally invite Dr. Reed to act as a special consultant for our pre-deployment workups. Her ability to break down the mechanics and diagnose shooter-specific issues from an outside perspective could be invaluable, especially for our newer team members." Eve's heart leaped. The offer was beyond anything she could have imagined. To work with these men, to contribute in some small way to their mission, it was a staggering thought. But the fear and self-doubt were still there. She was an ER doctor, not a military instructor. Commander Hayes considered the request, his eyes moving between his senior chief and the young doctor. "Dr. Reed, would such an arrangement interest you?" "It would be on a civilian contract basis, of course. Your schedule would be your own. But we believe you have a unique talent that could save lives." Save lives. The two words resonated with everything she stood for as a physician. She looked at the faces of the SEALs. The skepticism was gone, replaced by respect and a quiet anticipation. These men faced death as a matter of course. If her knowledge could give them even a 1% edge, how could she refuse? The scared part of her wanted to retreat to the familiar world of the ER. But her father's voice, clear and strong, cut through the doubt. "Talent is a responsibility, Evie. Don't you dare waste it." "Yes, sir," she heard herself say, her voice clear and steady. "I would be honored." Eve's acceptance didn't mean she hung up her scrubs. She was a doctor first. But her life now had a second, parallel track. On weekends, instead of just decompressing, she would meet with Cole's team, not as a shooter, but as a diagnostician. She brought her medical mind to the range. She used anatomical charts to explain body mechanics. She talked about the sympathetic nervous system to explain flinching. She applied the principles of motor learning she'd studied in medical school to help the SEALs build muscle memory more efficiently. She was a different kind of instructor, one who explained the why with the same precision she used to explain a medical diagnosis. Her two worlds began to merge in unexpected ways. The intense focus required for a long-range shot helped her stay calm during a chaotic trauma resuscitation. The diagnostic skills she honed on the range helped her spot subtle symptoms in the ER that other doctors might miss. 6 months after that fateful day, she was observing a new group of SEAL candidates. One young operator, much like Miller, was struggling. He was strong, fast, and fearless, but his marksmanship was holding him back. Eve watched him for an hour, then approached Cole. "It's his vision," she said quietly. "I think he has a slight, undiagnosed astigmatism in his dominant eye. He's compensating for it without realizing, which is throwing off his alignment." A trip to an optometrist confirmed her diagnosis. With the right corrective lenses, the SEAL's shooting improved dramatically. He went on to graduate at the top of his class. That was when Eve understood her true calling. She wasn't just a doctor who could shoot. She was a problem solver. Her gift wasn't just hitting a target, it was understanding the complex human system behind the rifle. Looking back, she often marveled at how one moment, one decision to speak up, had changed everything. She had found a new way to save lives, not with a scalpel or a defibrillator, but with knowledge, observation, and the courage to share it. The shy doctor had become a secret weapon for the nation's most elite warriors, proving that sometimes, the greatest expertise comes from the most unexpected places. All it took was for someone to hand her a rifle and step aside.